Good evening. My name is Marcelo Spina, and I'm faculty at C.I.A.R.C. I'm going to introduce Jorge, Francisco, Pancho from now on, Liernur. It's a pleasure, actually, to have him here from Argentina, of all places. I'm going to read this because it's the only way I can really manage through a short and serious introduction, okay? Jorge Francisco Liernur, Pancho, as I said, is an architect from the National University of Buenos Aires, Argentina. Pancho is currently the chairman of the Centers of Studies and Contemporary Architecture at the Torcuato di Tella University in Buenos Aires, which I believe is a school of architecture now. He's also a researcher of the Argentine National Council for Research on Science and Technology. He was the director of the Institute of Arte Americano and Aesthetics Investigation, and the founder and professor of the Juan O'Gorman Latin American Architecture Chair at the National University. Pancho has published an incredible amount of books, among them the, hard to note, the architecture in 20th century Argentina, writings on 20th century architecture in Latin America, architecture in Latin America between 1965 and 1985, a dictionary of architecture and the city in Argentina, the shadow of the avant-garde, Hannes Meyer in Mexico, among many others books and also important writings. And these are all, thick books, just so, not to sort of quantify the work. His studies are currently focused on the problem of otherness in relation with architecture and urbanism worldwide. His previous investigation covered the development of modern architecture and the city in Latin America, with special emphasis on cross-cultural processes. Into his frame, he examined the consequence of modern masters' relation with that region, mainly people like me, Corbusier, Hannes Meyer, Neutra, and others. In looking at this, and I was just talking to Pancho about it, it's frankly hard to situate Pancho's scholarly work and legitimize it in the context of Los Angeles, where notions of canon and history are continually erased and challenged. I'll therefore take a license and turn to a more personal story, one that, though foreign to you all, can certainly resonate with C.I.A.R.C. beginnings and definitely with young students, especially with recent graduates looking to find their place in the world. Not happy with the current state of public and private education in Argentina, Pancho Liernur decided to start a new school around 1997, if I'm correct. He began the Center for Contemporary Architecture in Buenos Aires with a decisively international and progressive attitude, when the economy in Argentina was still granting the possibility of global integration. Most importantly, and in order to shake the establishment, he relied on a number of young, eager, but incredibly experienced faculty, many of them just back from doing their studies in the US, talking like people like me or Hernandez Alonso or many others that we'll find in academic positions around the US these days. For a period of about 3 years, the center brought together the most progressive architects and educators worldwide. I'm not talking about people like us, I'm talking about the real. And these people were exposed to a relatively small audience, maybe one that was not fully prepared for them. Pancho did not care about popularity, he cared about content. This was his vision, his idea, his project, his school, his child, as I recall him saying, and he was going to stick to it no matter what. Things changed after 2001, and architecture in Argentina and Latin America as a whole took a turn from an interest in globalization and the formal avant-garde to a more local and somewhat critical, maybe more authentic regional culture, one could say. To his merit, the center finally became an accredited school and is now in its second year. Certainly a man of strong intellectual convictions, you have to respect that his ultimate goal was a better education, not just an aesthetic one, but an ethic one. Very different from the US, where academic work is often separated from political activism and rewarded with certain security. In South America, and especially in Argentina in the 60s and 70s, to be an intellectual, you were assumed to be an activist of sort, a progre, psycho voce, as I remember Pancho saying ironically, definitely a critic, somebody potentially dangerous to society. Now in a more institutional role, as a chairman of a School of Architecture of the Tella University, I think Pancho is still a militant, an enthusiastic advocate for public change, and a purveyor of a social vision for architecture and urban culture that is more equal, more balanced, more humane. So it is with immense satisfaction that I welcome Pancho Liernur, an Argentinian militant, a social activist, a critical modernist, and maybe one of the last humanists of South America.
Too much. Well, thank you very much for this amazing introduction. Yes, I'm not sure if what I have to say or I have to communicate to you will be something that you were waiting for and will be interesting. Anyway, as I think it's an important episode of the history of modern architecture. Small, forgotten, but anyway, important. Somehow in this episode are crossing two different stories, two different ways. One is the history of the C.I.A.M, the International Congress of Modern Architecture. And the other one is the history of the Argentinian culture. Probably you know, we all know about the history of the C.I.A.M. But anyway, it's important to remember some things about this particular period. Since the early 30s to the end of the 40s, the masters of modern architecture were more and more remaining alone somehow in front of the international situation. If you remember, modern architecture was defeated in the Soviet Union. Modern architecture in the late 30s was defeated as a movement, as a culture in Italy. This happens also in France. Not to say after Hitchcock and Johnson presentation in the US, the role and the place of modern architecture was really in a small corner or in some schools probably, but reduced to that spaces. And during the war, the situation was terrible for everybody. And in those years, in Latin America, some groups started to be organized, and like in Cuba, ATEC, in Peru, Espacio, and Austral in Argentina. And we have to remember that, so at the end of the 30s, at the beginning of the 40s, the only other group that I know existed in that time was sparse in the UK. So the leaders of the C.I.A.M after the war, after the Second World War, when they wanted to reorganize the Congress and somehow to reorganize the forces for the emergence of the new architecture around the world, they found themselves somehow alone. They were persons in many countries, of course, but individuals. So for that moment, those groups were a very important ally for the old leadership of the C.I.A.M. And they play an important role for the reconstruction of modern architecture in those precisely years. I'm talking about 1947, the first Congress of the afterwar in England, and 1949, the second post-war Congress in Italy. And again, the difficulties that they found to organize this kind of forces in other countries was very, very strong. Like, for instance, in Brazil, they couldn't organize any group for integrating the C.I.A.Ms. The same thing happened in the US, and it was very difficult to do that after the war in the socialist realm. So when for this reconstruction of the late 40s, they found these groups in Latin America. To consider some data, for instance, not everybody remember that for the construction of the headquarters of the United Nations in New York, there were 10 people in the team. From these 10 people, representing 10 different countries, there were 2 Latin Americans, Oscar Niemeyer and Julio Villamajó. This happened in 1949. During the organization of the Congress in 1949 in Italy, in that moment, there were many of the secretary of the C.I.A.M. that were organizing the Congress in Italy. He was working, and we will see that, Ernesto Rogers, the Italian Ernesto Rogers, he was working in Buenos Aires and in Tucumán in Argentina. And many of them had relations with the South. For instance, Breuer, in these late 40s and early 50s also, he came to the South and had some jobs there. So for those years, this was an important episode. I think it was forgotten. History was written after that time, and probably, as we will see, the forces in the architectural culture were reorganized in the 50s, and this happens to be, as I was saying, forgotten. But I think that it's important to remember that. And this is also one side of my presentation. I will not go back to that because those are general episodes that everybody probably knows or remember and can read in many books. The other side that is not very well known is what happened in the South in Argentina, and this will be the central theme in my presentation. So to locate us, we are here, and we have to go here. This is Argentina, and as we will see here from Google Earth, Chile, Argentina, Paraguay, Bolivia, Brazil, Uruguay. And something important to take into account, because it will be probably the axis of the ideas I will present to you in architecture, are those other maps. In the first ones, you see here the space of the Inca Empire in the Pacific, occupying the Pacific side of South America. The other is the Viceroyalty of Peru, where the main Spanish authorities were located in the south. You know that in Central America, Mexico was the center. Mexico City was the important center for the Spanish. But in the south, it was Lima here, and the south belonged until the end of the 18th century, belonged to this organizational form that was the Viceroyalty of Peru. There was the king in Spain, and the authority in the south of America was the vice king, or the virrey, located in Lima. This was absolutely an important region for the Spanish installation in Lima. The main interest were the mines in Bolivia. So in the south, there were nothing interesting for the Spaniard. And not only this, the communication, the Atlantic communication with Spain, or with Europe, was blocked. So the communication to enter and to go out from this region has to be developed by this Pacific way and then through the Caribbean, etc. It was not allowed to use the Atlantic way to Europe. This is, at the end of the 18th century, the creation of the Virreinato del Río de la Plata, the Viceroyalty of La Plata River. And you know, there's a big basin, the biggest in South America, with the Amazonas basin. And that happens, this happens at the end of the 18th century, was due because the growing importance of the British Empire. And so you have an old organization from the pre-Spanish presence in America and also regarding the Spanish presence in America that is related to the Northwest and to the Pacific, and the mother one that is related to the Atlantic, with the capital of this new viceroyalty that was Buenos Aires. That in the viceroyalty and the location of the new virrey in Buenos Aires implied the opening to the Atlantic realm. So these two poles are absolutely important. They are still important for the understanding of what happened even in political life and daily life in Argentina. A couple of images about what was built in the previous to the existence of Austral in Buenos Aires. This kind of modernism is a very cultivated one, but somehow classic, somehow with yes, not with any kind of interest in a sort of avant-garde position. Is elegant. They did not care really about materials, use of, this is a sort of white, harmonic, classic form of modernism, to simplify and to have an image. The presence of the new generation after 1937 changed all these things. But this new generation will be working between these two poles, the pole of the Atlantic modernizing scheme or way of living on projects, and the pole of the Pacific Northwestern traditional paradigm of cultural paradigm. This is a very nice picture of the group, the students, the architecture, the new architects that were graduated in the School of Architecture in Buenos Aires in 1937. They are crossing the equator line, and they are celebrating this crossing. And we see some of them that we will find in our lecture that are very important. This is Jorge Ferrari Hardoy, and this is Juan Kurchan. This trip was really very important for them. They visited Europe. This was the traditional trip for the students. Here they are in Munich. You see the swastika. Here they were visiting everywhere, the main countries. Even they went, I remember, to Brno to see modern architecture. But mostly they were visiting traditional architecture and the new architecture too. Those are again Jorge Ferrari Hardoy and Juan Kurchan. I suppose that this picture was taken in the atelier, the Rue de Sèvres, Le Corbusier. They met Le Corbusier. They went to visit the atelier of Le Corbusier, as we will see in the following images. And at the atelier of Le Corbusier, they met this guy that was Antonio Bonet. He was a Spaniard. Is a very important figure. This picture was taken in the Patrice boat during the famous Congress that from which resulted the Athens chart. And here he's with Alvar Aalto, and here is Le Corbusier in the same occasion. Bonet, very young, he was studying in 1931, studying architecture at the end of his career. Bonet went to Paris and went to Paris to help in the location of this famous painting, the Guernica by Picasso, to help his master, José Luis Sert, that was the one that built this Spanish pavilion in the 1937 international exhibition in Paris, where, as everybody know, were presented for the first time this Guernica it occupied the center of the exhibition in the middle of the civil war taking place in Spain. As a student or as an assistant architect in the atelier of Le Corbusier, Bonet did these drawings it was a project for an exhibition in Liège, in Belgium. As you can see, those are some rememberings of Gaudí, of Barcelona's vault. It was a proposal by Bonet. This is the kind of drawings he presented to Le Corbusier, but finally this was the project that was presented to and never built for this exhibition. This was one side of the work they did in Paris, and this is another side. When these young people, Jorge Ferrari Hardoy and Juan Kurchan, visited Le Corbusier, Le Corbusier did not have big jobs in that moment, late 30s. The description of this moment is really very funny, because it was very cold. Le Corbusier did not have money to pay for any kind of system. He was really in a very peculiar situation, personal situation. Anyway, he proposed them, if they wanted to remain with him, he proposed them to develop this sketch that was the sketch that he proposed in 1929 when he visited Buenos Aires. I would say for the first time. Actually, he went only one time in 1929 to Buenos Aires. And he had these ideas. He had developed these ideas. He tried during the first 30s to continue and to develop these ideas and to realize the plan, his ideas for Buenos Aires, but he didn't find any kind of support, and he was surprised for having these young people ready to help him to develop really as a sort of pre-plan, not only a sketch, this plan. This probably is both the students, what they started to do was this scheme. This is an application, a direct application of the Ville Radieuse. That was the scheme Le Corbusier was thinking in those years. But it was very simple, it was very direct application, and he made this sketch and proposed what will be the plan. I will not develop it, we don't have time to do that, but anyway, he maintained the idea of building the big skyscraper into the river, and then a sport zone here in front of the river and occupying what was, until that moment, the old harbor of the city. and many different centers here. But what is interesting of this plan, that is a big one, is this kind of, this presentation as sort of palimpsest. It's an overimposition of a new grid into over the old grid of blocks that compose the city of Buenos Aires. It's like a sort of excavation into this old grid. The other interesting thing is the presence of a park here, which is it's interesting because if you remember, Le Corbusier did not propose any kind of parks. The city has to be a park. In the modern city, you did not need parks because the city was actually a park. And here, instead of that, he proposed an autonomous park in the shore of the river, and there, what is also important for us, the university city. He maintained some traits of Buenos Aires. This is the scheme. The idea was to concentrate the buildings and the city in a small part here, and let this without construction for services for the city. Those are some of the sketches, not by Le Corbusier, but by the probably Ferrari, Hardoy, or Kurchan. I'm not so sure. And this is very important because, as you see here, the skyscraper that in the very famous design, the drawing I showed before, were part of the first idea, that are isolated in the river and are presented like the big piece. In that sketch, you can see the skyscrapers in the river, but from the city, view from the city. And with the existing city there, I mean, he was not thinking in tabula rasa, in destroying the city. He was thinking in, as I was saying, excavate somehow into the grid and onto the plan of the existing city and creating some enclaves, some particular pieces. The other thing I want to underline of the plan is what he says is a the transformación molecular de la ciudad. It's a molecular transformation of the city. He was not thinking in, I insist in the idea of the tabula rasa. He thought in time the city could transform itself and the blocks will be transforming. He created here a sort of a transportation grid overimposed over the existing grid, and here we see the kind of new buildings developed across the city, but departing from that scheme, step by step. You see here the remaining cities, the remaining streets that are those. So this was the idea that he had for the city in 1937-38, when this young Argentinian student helped him to develop the first sketch. This is another interesting drawing because this is the main center for the directional center of the city, and this is the street for movie theaters and different kind of uses that actually exist. Is an important existing avenue in Buenos Aires. So redevelops, you see the kind of things that remain from the old buildings. He had the opportunity to present the plan to the authorities in Buenos Aires, and this is the moment when he presented the plan to the Argentinian ambassador in Paris. This one, and this is Jorge Ferrari, Le Corbusier, and this is precisely the moment when he presented the plan to the official authorities in Argentina, in Buenos Aires. The young architects, they finished this year or more this staging at Le Corbusier's studio, and Bonet also wanted to go to Argentina because he had relatives there, and the civil war was ending, and not on the side of the Republicans. He was part of the Republicans. It was Franco who was winning the civil war in Spain. He couldn't come back to Spain, so he decided to go to Argentina. And so in this moment, they decided to create this Austral Group. I have to clarify, Austral, we don't have any kind of translation, I believe, in English. The translation could be southern, because it's the only one I have, but it means, yeah, southern. Australia is, the name of Australia is related to this position of the southern pole. Or the southern hemisphere. And this is the reason they choose this name, meaning somehow south. This is the cover of the magazine. They published, started to publish in 1938. And so they arrived in Buenos Aires and started to create really a group and to function as a group. They gather many different people. I mean, when I say they, I'm talking about Ferrari, Kurchan, and Bonet, because they were the leaders of the group. And they gave themselves a kind of clandestine organization. They understood from Le Corbusier that a sort of campaign was necessary to install the idea of the plan and the idea of new architecture. They had to fight. They had this, even really, is an avant-gardist way of organizing themselves. And this is, for instance, this is a form that they used in order to establish relation with the laborers and to study the problem of housing for the working class. And they had, for this, they had relation with the Communist Party. For instance, some of them had relation with the Communist Party in Buenos Aires. So what I'm trying to say is that they did not occupy an official place. They insisted in act as an avant-garde group because they did not believe that the government, the authorities, will actually develop the ideas of the plan, and that meant a sort of discussion with Le Corbusier that was still believing that this will be possible. I have to clarify, the authorities in Buenos Aires were somehow illegal. They were a coup d'etat in the 30s, and as we will see, there will be again a coup d'etat in the early 40s that will let these authorities, these illegal authorities, outside of the power, and will be important for the development of the plan. This is another drawing of what they were trying to do in the first month, in the first times of the organization of the group. And this is important because if you remember, this is Buenos Aires. This is the plan of Buenos Aires. This is the river, and this is the shore, and this is the old harbor. And in the location of this sportive zone for Le Corbusier, they thought it would be better to locate the university city because there was a competition for the university city in Buenos Aires, and so they decided to change the proposal of Le Corbusier, to contest the proposal of Le Corbusier, and to present their own ideas to the university city that which Le Corbusier located in the north, as I was showing before. And this is one of the drawings for one of the buildings for that competition that was not finished. They had many problems also to understand themselves and to organize Austral as a group. I believe that as a group, it functions probably 5 years or something like this. And after that, they function, it was not really this pack of young people trying to function as almost a political party in the country. Well, why I'm presenting the Rue Molitor building by Le Corbusier? Because in the moment of designing this building, it was Bonet, Antonio Bonet, in the atelier, and he was very related to this building, and he probably admired this building. Something that I want to underline is the presence of the vault here for the apartment by Le Corbusier himself, and the use of glass in every kind of forms, and steel for the facade. This contrast between the vault in the upper level and this interest for the facade will be developed by Bonet and two other colleagues in Buenos Aires with this building that was built in 1938, and they were atelier for artists probably or architects. But what I would like to underline is that this is a sort of flat building with regard to the Rue Molitor. So in this building, the relation between the vaults here with a very traditional way of kind of construction, and the other is stronger and visible, more visible than in the case of Rue Molitor, where the vaults are hidden somehow from view from the street. This tension between the traditional vaults and the industrial facade is part of this argument, and we can see this probably as a first presentation in this building in the center of Buenos Aires. You see, those are the plans, and these are, this is the relation with the vaults here, the Catalan vaults, because Bonet came from Catalonia, from Barcelona, and you see the interior here, and how strong is this relation in this flat block of this small building. We start to discover this element here that I would like to underline, the relation between this shape and this shape. That will be also important. Some other images of the interiors of the atelier and the exterior in the night with the light shining with the very different forms, because the use of an incredible amount of different kind of glasses, like this or this or this or this, really is a sort of experiment by using industrial elements that you have to contrast with the first buildings I was showing. They had absolutely nothing to do with that. Those are some details of the building with this kind of different experiments with materials. And this is the second product, probably the most famous product of that moment, because it's this chair that is well known as a, no, actually it's not well known, because it has to be called BKF, because this was the original name, but it's known as the butterfly chair. And here we have Jorge Ferrari in the butterfly chair, Antonio Bonet, and Juan Kurchan. This chair was invented and was designed by them and introduced for the first time, and it was designed for those ateliers. Those are some of the schemes. Actually, it's a sort of, I would say, it's an artistic recreation of an existing chair that was the Tripolina, used by the Italians in Africa, but was designed in England in the 19th century. But as you can see the drawings here, the kind of geometric elegance and continuity of these pieces has nothing to do with the so elementary, not artistic but industrial shape of the chair. And here again, what is important is to to see this contrast between the Atlantic and the Pacific, the modern side and the traditional one, in the chair too. This is an element that is used for building. It's an industrial element that is introduced for the first time for the design of this kind of furniture. And this is leather. This is a traditional material. So both things are put together and live together, like in the case of the atelier in this production by the group. The chair was an incredible success, so incredible, so amazing that they never received any coin, any money, because it was so easy to copy. It was so perfectly modern in the sense, so easy to be reproduced, that even if they sell the idea to some firms in the US, they never received any money for that. And in the early 40s, this was designed in the late 30s. In the early 40s, they came to this country 2 pieces, and they were the first 2 that left Argentina. One for the Falling Water house by Wright, and this is the chair in the Falling Water house, bought by Kaufman. And this is the chair bought by the Museum of Modern Art in New York. The chair went to the museum, they were the first destiny for this chair. After that moment, the chair started to be presented everywhere, millions of copies. Here it received, still at least using the name of Hardoy, that was loose in times. Here is exhibited in a shop. And here we have, is a very representative of what the meaning of the chair, no? It's Le Corbusier in the chair and Breuer exhibiting the new, even the new way of sitting, this informal way of sitting in a chair. And, but probably this is more, strongly because this is, as you obviously known, this is Sophia Loren. So the chair was in the world for everybody and occupying different kind of imaginaries and established as one of the most representative chairs of modernity, like can be seen here in this drawing in some magazine in the US. So what is important of the atelier and the chair is that in that moment, still the 2, I would say, souls of Austral were together, working together in one piece. And we will see how these 2 souls, the Pacific and the Atlantic, to use this metaphor, will be divided in time and will go different ways. Bonet with Jorge Vivanco and another partner, they designed in the early 40s these 3 houses that are located in a site in the suburbs of Buenos Aires. Here experimenting the vaults, mainly the different kind of vaults in concrete, and the use of brick that were not used previously. And this is an important step. But probably more important is this one that was done by Bonet himself alone. In 1943, he was invited to build or to organize, actually to design an estate in the beach here in the territory of Uruguay that is called Solana del Mar. This is more or less the place where it's located, and in particular this one. You see here is Buenos Aires and not far away La Solana del Mar. This is the kind of landscape, a very nice landscape in that place of Uruguay, with this forest that is beautiful, this lagoon here, and this is the place where Bonet located his sort of neighborhood or summer city, if you want. And this is a view of the main building there. This is the plan, a plan that tried to separate circulations, that this is the main axis of entrance, and that is a sort of Atlantic way, and this is the center and the central axis of the organization of the state. And what is important is even being there, he tried to separate the levels for the circulation of different kind of circulation. Bonet built these houses with, I believe, an incredible quality, architectural quality, even trying to experiment with bolts or not, or with different materials and concrete. And this is another of these houses, another one. But probably the main building, as I was saying, was the restaurant that has this piece here, somehow probably remembering me somehow. It's probably the first time when one kind of block of this type was built in the south. But as you will see, again, this is not the only piece. I'm talking about this one, and this is the other one that, as we will see, also maintain this contrast I was talking about. We see the main front here, but the other side, where you can see the use of local stones and a sort of interest in showing these two different sides. I did not mention that in the moment when they were at Le Corbusier's atelier during the late 30s, it was there another Latin American, a very important one that will be very well known as an artist. I'm talking about Mata, the famous Chilean painter. For that moment also it was very important the relation with surrealism and informalism. And you see these are the drawing for the fireplace here, and some of the details that were created by Bonet for that magnificent building in Uruguay. What about the others? Ferrari and Kurchan in Buenos Aires started to design a couple of housing buildings for apartments in Buenos Aires. Only to have, this is the shape of Buenos Aires, is turned up, and this is the harbor and the front of the river, and this is the downtown, the center of the city, and the neighborhood where the buildings are located is here. That was very perimetral, very suburban in that moment. This was the first building that they did. It's a small one with these three different levels, with a very detailed, and if you see the care which they designed the facade and the proportions and the materials, etc., is really very elegant and very careful design. But the most significant building was the one that is the Brigade del Pino apartments, or the house of the eucalyptus. You will see why was called the house of the eucalyptus. Remember, this probably has some trace of this building by Lubetkin and Tecton. This is the place where it's located, here, and you see this is precisely exactly here where this is the block, and this is the place of where is located the building. The most important thing is that they could, instead of locating the building in front of the street, they decided to put the building in that position in the side. They were existing eucalyptus here, and so the building that is this block mainly somehow contains these two pre-existing trees inside, and that will be here and will cross the whole building, as we will see. This was a very, very carefully studied building. You see the kitchens are very small because they had a big restaurant in the ground floor that will supposedly be used for instead of cooking in the houses, they will have this restaurant that will provide for meats to the apartments. Probably the plan has to do with this plan. You see here the shape of this plan that was a building that was in process of design also in the late 30s at the Le Corbusier's atelier in the Rue Richter, never built, but anyway, I think they knew perfectly this building, and the one they did in Buenos Aires had to do something to do with that. But for me, what is more interesting is this. If you remember what I was saying about the plan, this is my hypothesis. I think this, because analyzing the building, you can realize that. I take, and somehow they mention this idea, but it's not really strong. If you see this piece here, no? I believe they put the building here and with this other branch like an L in order to demonstrate that the idea of Le Corbusier, of this slow development of the city through these changes in time, was possible, really. Was possible to be realized. And we found this drawing that was never built and that was supposed to be located here. The restaurant will be demolished, and they plan to build the L here, so to have this, in my opinion, this piece built, really built. And we see here Le Corbusier seeing, watching this idea. Those are some images of the process of construction of the building, and you see the neighborhood, a very flat one in that moment. Now it's a highly developed neighborhood in Buenos Aires, and the process again of construction and the final images. And here you see the tree, and this also was important because they say the tree creates movement, and the movement means time. And if you remember, those were important terms in that moment, the relation between space and time, and Siegfried Gideon will be publishing an important reflection on that. And they were very conscious about this crossing. Also, it's a sort of surrealist crossing between a grid, very rational grid, and the organic presence of the tree inside the building. This is the restaurant and the rest of the building. And some contemporary images, well, you again can see the sort of very careful process of design. And you have to remember that 1943, 1942 was the exhibition Brazil builds at the MoMA, and was presented the famous Ministry of Education and Culture in Rio. So it's difficult to find this kind of buildings with these brisolets, these colors, and these kind of intricate technologies also for that moment, for the early 40s in the world. Those are some of the interiors you will see, and you see again here the process of design of every element in the building. This is one side. In 1943-44, they were invited to, actually it was 43, they were invited to participate in a competition in Mendoza. This is a city in the west side of Argentina, located near the Andes. And it was a plan to, it was supposed to be a plan for develop the transportation system of the city, but they thought that it would be important to invite Le Corbusier, and this is a letter where they, when they presented the competition, the plans for the competition, where Le Corbusier and Jeanneret were included as part of the design. And actually, they transformed the idea of only thinking in transportation system. They believed that it was necessary also to develop other ideas, and that this was also a sort of the first moment when they started to think, instead of forms, isolated forms for the city, they started to think in terms of regional understanding of the problem of cities. So the problem was bigger than only a city, and they presented these schemes, and also a scheme for the city and the new location of housing, mainly again housing for workers that were not part of the design. The other important project they did, some of them together with new younger, including new younger people too, students, etc., was related to San Juan. San Juan is another city. If you remember, Mendoza was located here. Here is San Juan. In 1944, there was a big earthquake in San Juan, the city of San Juan, that is a traditional one. If you remember, belong to this northwestern side related to the old traditions. And in San Juan, when the city was destroyed, they decided to go again as a sort of avant-garde, a sort of brigade. They talk about brigade, and they went to help the people there to rebuild the city. That was tremendously destroyed. It was a tragedy, probably the biggest tragedy of this kind in the history of Argentina. And what is important, the event of San Juan is important also because this is Juan Perón and Evita, and was the moment where if you remember, I mentioned 1943, the government again was a coup d'etat. Perón was part of this coup d'etat, and so things started to change absolutely in Argentina, and these two figures of Juan Perón and Evita Perón started to be important for this new history of the country in that moment, particularly departing from the earthquake in San Juan. The governmental proposals were this kind, these grids. It started to be built an enormous bureaucracy, and the local interest developers, etc., were continuously blocking any kind of new proposals. The brigade, the Austral Brigade, proposed and was fighting to be considered in the rebuilding of the city, proposing many ideas for, again, here very clearly for the whole region, because they thought the whole region has to be reorganized in order to recreate the city. But this was a failure, and they were expulsed from San Juan. Meanwhile, Le Corbusier was trying to publish his ideas about the plan for Buenos Aires, because he was convinced that using a book and the publication, he will convince the authorities about the real capacities of his ideas to transform the city of Buenos Aires. And this is the manuscript that he did for a book that was never published and remained never published. This is another page of this manuscript. And this is very important because this is the writing. You see, he mentioned Ferrari here. His idea was to develop a book with the rectangular form that was the classic form of thinking books by Le Corbusier. This form, this long form, was not unimportant at all, as we will see. This is the maquette of the book that was did in Buenos Aires. You see how he canceled in 1940 because it had to be changed. Time changed. This was supposed to be the undercover Here, oh, sorry. And some of the pages, how the book was was designed. This piece exists too at the archive, Ferrari Hardoy archive at GSD. But what happened? With Perón, a friend of, Ferrari had the opportunity to publish the plan because he was invited by an architectural magazine, La Arquitectura de Hoy. It was so important, the Latin American public and Latin American architecture in that moment, that L'Architecture d'aujourd'hui has a version in Spanish for this public. And in that Spanish version of L'Architecture d'aujourd'hui, the most famous architectural magazine, French architectural magazine, in that version that was vertical, Ferrari Hardoy accepted to publish the plan against the will of Le Corbusier. And Le Corbusier was very angry with that. No? And you see the difference here between the horizontal form and the vertical one. And this is something that can explain too. For Le Corbusier, the whole plan was relatively important. For him, what was important was the front of the city, on what he called the La Mar, the sea. Actually, you know, the Rio de la Plata is a river, not a sea, but he considered this as a sort of the sea, and his illusion was to build this front, and so this was the main piece that has to be exhibited in this horizontal form, not in the vertical one that was that destroyed somehow the continuity of this shape of the Corbusier's idea. 1947, Le Corbusier and Jorge Ferrari Hardoy at the Bridgewater Congress in the first post-war Congress. In those years, because the presence of this new kind of movement, populist movement, a friend of Ferrari was in charge in the city of Buenos Aires. And it was this personal friend of Ferrari who invited Ferrari to develop finally the plan. But at the same time, one has to recognize that ideas had changed. They started to be more related to the North, to the ideas coming from the Anglo-Saxon culture, even mainly from the US and the UK. And anyway, they were more radical than Le Corbusier himself. If Le Corbusier didn't wanted to transform and to have a tabula rasa transforming all the city, here they are proposing how the whole city could be concentrated in this more gray zone of the drawing. They calculated this had to be, and for that they developed their own ideas to start to build this kind of buildings using the zoo, the site of the existing zoo, and they proposed this kind of new city on their own, because without consulting Le Corbusier for the shore of the river. The other episode that was very important, we had Mendoza, San Juan, Tucumán, the center of the northern part of the country, and in this moment, in this same moment, when the plan was in process of being developed in Buenos Aires, a new university was decided to be built in the province of Tucumán. In order to have an idea about the foolish dimension of this project, this is the city of Tucumán, and this is the university city. So, and this is a traditional city in Argentina. So this is the proportion, absolutely unproportioned. But they had the money, they believed they could do that, and so it was in order to work at the same time in the plan of Buenos Aires and in the university city that they invited these architects and these important figures that I mentioned before. Those are some of the buildings, but you note here, for instance, these shapes that are not anymore 90 degrees. They started to use also the right kind of grids for the development of the city, this university city. Here is clear that that thing. You hear the plaza, the covered plaza of the university city, and this is the image of the covered plaza that was tasted, that was investigated in Italy at the Institute of Engineer in Italy that was under the direction of Pierluigi Nervi, who was involved in the project of this kind of very peculiar vaults. And you see another important thing that also present the slow differentiation with the original ideas of the 20s in Le Corbusier, that is this organic shape of these balls. It has not any more to do with the geometric, the pure abstract geometry of Le Corbusier's ideas and some of the Central European ideas. This is the moment when the building started to be built, one of the main buildings. Ferrari and Bonet had, in the early 50s, the opportunity also to propose development for a small city in the shores of Buenos Aires. And here we start to see how Bonet and Ferrari and Kurchan, but mainly Bonet and Ferrari, started to separate these two sides, these two souls that were integrated in the first moment of the group. This is one house that Bonet built in Buenos Aires in the middle of the 50s. And as you see, the tension that we saw in the first examples does not exist anymore. This is a pure, really, it's a fantastic house with a geometric shape, very clear, with not anymore this kind of contradiction between tradition and modernity that we could see in the first images. And this is another building by Bonet this is a postcard of that moment in the 50s, and the building is this one that was built by Bonet of housing in another city in the shores of Buenos Aires named Mar del Plata. And this is only to show what the kind of other pieces he did in Rio de la Plata. And this is a church in Uruguay. It's this one. This is the state, how it is now. But you see the kind of pure, absolutely obsessive somehow geometric patterns that are guiding the construction of this church that is a part of in concrete and is an incredible abandoned piece in the south. So if you see the Bonet, Ferrari Hardoy, Kurchan, they somehow were working to this pole, and they installed themselves in this modernized pole. Ferrari Hardoy insisted in coming to the US, in being invited to the US, and this is one of the sides. The other one had this destiny. The university city in Tucumán was a failure. It never developed. I should talk about politics in Argentina. It would be very complicated. But anyway, they built some pieces like these houses, and it was Jorge Vivanco, one of the most probably conscious about this discovery that apart from Buenos Aires and this Atlantic part that was the modern one and the biggest and the most lasting part of Argentina, they were an interior, there were provinces, there were another realities in the country that has to be taken into account. So this was the kind of architecture he proposed for these houses that were the houses for the faculty, supposed to be for the faculty. And you see, very simple, but anyway, where the local, regional elements, the stone, etc., are dominant over the the modernistic one. And so at the end, in the middle of the 50s, Vivanco was invited also to develop a plan for the city of Jujuy, that is the northern one in Argentina, in the extreme northwestern side of the country, and he proposed these ideas for the development of the city of Jujuy that never was built. So, and by this way, I tried to show how the unity of the first unity of the group was divided in two pieces, and there were some of them. Actually, they installed themselves in Tucumán. They installed to work there, and they remained there, rejecting. They wrote. Vivanco wrote a letter to Ferrari Hardoy saying to him, "You know, Jorge, you don't understand really the problem. You want to change Buenos Aires and you want to develop Buenos Aires, but you don't realize that the very way to change Buenos Aires is to change Tucumán, is to change to recreate a different relation between the harbor, between the Atlantic and the existing traditional side of the country." That was the mission, and this was the reason why they installed themselves. They moved to the northern side and installed themselves there. So this was the other part. The destiny of them were very different. Some of them, Antonio Bonet, we talk about him. He went to Spain in the early 60s. Some others, Horacio Catalano, Horacio Caminos, they came finally to the US and they installed themselves in the US, especially Horacio Catalano, who was a very important architect and teacher at the MIT, and he lived in Cambridge. There were many other destinies, different destinies. I would say Jorge Vivanco probably is one of the most representative of this other side. And so after the Cuban Revolution, he decided to go to Cuba and to continue there with a really strong plan of transformation of a society. And even after Cuba, he went to Argelia, but he did not have a very nice end, somehow forgotten for everybody. But those were the two destinies. What about the first history, or the first story I started to talk about? This. I mean, this is a picture of the early 50s. And you see the cross here. And this is Peter Smithson and Alison Smithson and Bakema and Van Eyck, and was the creation of a new generation in Europe. And so the beginning of a recovery of the centrality of Europe for the architectural culture in the last part of the 20th century. So those were the young generation that were important for the 50s, and these young people that were important for the 40s and were important for recreate the C.I.A.M, they lose the power, and the international situation was absolutely different, and they did not have anymore the opportunity to occupy this important role that they occupied in the period I was trying to synthesize in this lecture. So that's all. Thank you.